welcome everyone to the fourth in our webinar series. Today we are talking about promising experiences for student writers with Andy Shinborn and Jeremy Heiler. It is May 12th, 2020, and we welcome so many familiar faces back for this fourth event, and welcome those of you who may be joining us for the first time or watching the recording later. My name is Troy Hicks. I'm the director of the Chippewa River Writing Project, and we're glad to have you on. And I'm going to try to do all my introductory materials really quickly because I know that Jeremy and Andy have tons of content. So Andy, if you are ready to go, feel free to kick on the sharing, and I'll try to whip through those slides as quickly as possible if you're willing to be my slide navigator.
Will do.
Thank you, Andy, for doing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, awesome. So again, this is promising experiences for student writers. Jeremy and Andy have lots of experiences to share, and I'm really looking forward to this. Obviously, you're here. You know we're live 4 to 5 p.m. every Tuesday. We started these conversations through a series of, hey, we should talk, and what's going on, and how are we going to deal with remote learning? And then we said, let's put them all online for other people to join in. And we have, and you're here, and we're so glad. And hopefully you're sharing these resources with your colleagues, and we'd love to hear how you're doing remote learning in your own teaching and learning context. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. And I'll try to, again, to be pretty brief. We started this series a few weeks ago. We still got a few more sessions to go. We will also at the end tell you about what we have planned in June with an Open Institute. So that it shouldn't even say possible. I forgot to change that on my slide. That was my fault. We do have one planned, and we'll tell you more details about that, shared links and flyers at the end. But we're trying to figure this out just as all of you are, and we're glad that you're here today. And again, these questions are worth having on screen for at least a few moments. I won't read all of them verbatim, but these were the questions that you initially shared with us when you filled out your online forms. And we're guessing that you're still, like us, struggling to figure out exactly what to do to answer all of these questions. And one of the things that we've continued to say throughout all of this, which is an ethos of the Writing Project, is that there's no one right answer. We are all teaching and learning in our own context in ways that make sense. There are some practices that we can adapt and adopt and carry from one place to the other. And there are always little tips and tricks that we can build into our own pedagogy. And we're hoping that you're going to be able to take some of those away today. One of the things that we already know is good Zoom etiquette. Mute if you need to. If you're still using the old version of the Zoom application, the hyperlinks may not work, and you might have to do a right click. If you've updated recently, the Zoom application now allows you to take those hyperlinks and just click right through on them again. That was a security feature they had worried about. And if we do happen to do polls or breakout rooms, we'll make sure that we give you instructions for all that. People have been asking about saving the chat at the end. You should be able to click on that little ellipsis button and download the chat file. And then also I'll try to curate any links that are not in the slide deck and make sure that when I give you the email update, you get those links as well. All right, and then all of these sessions are being provided by our Writing Project teacher consultants because they're trying to figure this out. They have done this for free and not even asked for a stipend. And our Writing Project gets a small amount of support from CMU, but we're mostly funded through outside grants as well as professional development work. If you see that you've enjoyed these webinar series and you want to continue to support the work of the Writing Project, we would always welcome your gifts at giving.cmich.edu. And if you know someone, either you or someone else in your district who is looking for professional development around remote learning, please contact me. You have my email address there on the slide, and you can also message me in the chat and I can follow up with you there. And new this week, and we'll come back to this again at the end, preview of coming attractions. We have pinned down some dates and some times and some ideas for our remote literacy learning promising practices for online classrooms Open Institute this summer. And we will just tease with that right now and save the rest of the conversation until the end of our call today. And I'll also be sharing some information via the email follow-up. And with that, I think it is time for me to turn it over to the two of you. So Jeremy, Andy, take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Troy. And I want us to just give a thank you to Andy for being willing to present with me today. So it's always great to learn from Andy and the rest of my writing project consultants. Those of you that are here last week know I'm Jeremy Heiler. I am a middle school ELA and science teacher. Currently, I'm teaching 6th grade English and 7th grade science. I literally do teach out in the middle of a cornfield. And I also am a community ambassador for NCTE. I do some work with KQED as a media literacy innovator. Kind of have a bunch of different hats that I wear right now. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jeremy V. Baller. So I'll let Andy introduce himself.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's always great to work with you and learn with you. And I just want to say I'm glad to meet everybody here today. I'm Andy Schimborn. I teach at Mount Pleasant High School. I teach 11th and 12th grade. I have AP Lit as a class, and I also have 11th grade General Education as a class as well. I'm a past president of Michigan Council of Teachers of English. I'm also on the executive board for the Michigan Reading Association. And I am a co-facilitator of the hashtag TeachWrite group, where we work with teacher writers to improve ourselves as writers so that we can improve our students as writers as well. It's quite similar to what we do with the Chippewa River Writing Project and also with National Writing Project as well. So thank you very much for inviting me here today. And I think get started with Jeremy today.
Oh boy. Yeah. And if anybody does have all the answers to this remote learning stuff, feel free to step in at any time and just go ahead and lead the presentation, because, you know, we're good. We can work that way. Before we get started, just some shameless self-promotion here, especially with Andy's and Troy. Just their book was just released, Creating Confident Writers. And then there's a couple other titles there that you can take a look at that I talked about last week, between just some grammar instruction during this digital age, and then also some science inquiry-based stuff with Ask, Explore, Write that I have co-authored with Troy. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about today was what could grammar potentially look like during this time. And then before I dive into it, my disclaimer to this is that some of the things I was doing with my students before COVID came along and decided to just wreak havoc on our worlds. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what I do in my classroom. But before I do that, I am going to have you participate, so that way we're not just sitting and getting. I am going to post a link in the chat room to something called what is YoTeach. Actually, I mentioned this last session. I'm also going to be putting on there a PIN number for you to access the YoTeach room. And this is going to be a back channel. And I kind of wanted to go ahead and start the conversation today with you answering a question in YoTeach, and that is, what are the challenges you face right now while teaching writing online? So again, what are the challenges you face while teaching online? I'm going to pop that question into the chat as well. So I just popped in the link, the PIN number you will need to get into the room, and then the question is, what are the challenges you face teaching writing online? And then I'm going to pull that up on my end and see how we're doing. So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes. So if I'm quiet, I'm just giving you time to work. YoTeach is a great way to do some back channeling in your own classroom. If this is something that you would like your students to use, if you are a one-to-one school, or even if it's something that you wanted to let students use their cell phone. Yeah, I like some of the responses that I'm getting. I'm really seeing the idea of this connection that we have with students. That's one of the things I definitely miss with my students, is being able to just sit down and have those one-on-one conversations. And I know I'm pretty sure Andy's going to be touching on this a little bit later in terms of having those connections. So that's great. Editing, yes. Yes, I definitely agree that the students that definitely need more help are excelling with parents. I have a little buddy that's doing that now. So we all are facing some challenges, and I see someone's doing some digital writing, so hopefully we can give you some clues to help you out a little bit today with some things. One of the things that I like to do with my writing with my students, even online, is to scaffold. Start small, build up. And then I also like to do formative assessment before summative assessment. And this may not be new to any of you. You may be like, yep, I know, I got that part. So I'm going to dive right in terms of looking at how I scaffold things with my classroom. First of all, I use an online tool called Grammarflip. Grammarflip is a pretty inexpensive. There is a free side to it. Inexpensive side, Andy, you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide. The inexpensive side is that up to 50 students, you can pay $6.90 a month, which I don't think is too bad. Now, for that works really well for me because I'm in a smaller school district. But what that allows you to do as a teacher, that allows you to get student reports. It allows you to assess writing. There's some writing activities that go along with it. And there's also some connections to some Kahoot, if you like Kahoot in your classroom, something fun to do. You can do an annual plan with up to 50 students, and that's $69 a year. And so it's really inexpensive. I think it's a great tool. It's not the end all be all, like solving all grammar problems, but it's a really informational tool to help them get grounded and get started with it. And what I do is I give this to my students even now, and they have about 4 days to complete this. And then we do turn around and we do a more formal lesson with it, but almost like flipped lessons. You know, you're doing it outside a classroom, and then you're coming back and really doing the homework side of it or the activity side of it with your students. So from there, once we go to Grammarflip, I do something with them that's called grammar hacking, which is looking at this template. And this is my grammar template that I created quite a few years ago with a colleague out at the Rhode Island Digital Literacy Institute with Renee Hobbs. And this was to be able to talk about the spaces that students write in. I think that's really important right now, especially with being home, that we need to make sure we understand that students are writing in different spaces right now, probably more so than ever because they are home and not just when they're in school. And so we had come up with some different spaces, and we have this conversation in my classroom about formal versus informal writing. So we look at these different spaces and we decide which one of these spaces are formal or informal, and how do we write in those spaces. And so, for example, a Google Doc would be formal. Snapchat would be an informal because there's pictures and usually they're just writing things across the screen. And that's changed over the years. And you could replace Snapchat or Twitter. You could probably replace those with like TikTok today, or you could replace it with Instagram. There's probably those. You could check with your students and see which ones are more popular. Then there's text messaging. Emails are more formal. Texting, this idea of formal, informal, ladies and gentlemen, really does help with students in terms of getting them to consider audience and what their audience is. Because with texting, they may not have all the text talk that they have when they're texting their mom or their dad or their guardian. Whereas if they're texting their friend, it may be pretty loaded with texting, that text lingo. And then we have debates over Twitter and Facebook. When Twitter was that 140 character limit, we talked that being more of a informal space, and Facebook, again, depending on what your audience is. I would love to be able to spend time going into the grammar template, but I want to make sure that Andy has enough time to go through his stuff. But I do have a couple of links here on the next slide, I believe, that will allow you to go into the grammar template. You can make a copy of it, and then there's also some instructions with it. And so just to touch on some of those instructions, that you would make a copy of the template so you can edit it yourself. And if you are someone in the younger grades, this would be something where you could eliminate a few of them in there. And what I'm asking students to do, you'll see in the next slide, so just hold tight for a moment. But each writing platform can be altered. Feel free to add, delete text boxes, and then remembering grammar rules. And so the scaffold comes after we get done doing something. This would be an activity we would do after doing a Grammarflip lesson. And then I think this does a really nice job of building community through the template because of the fact that they can work with partners. And also it's something that we put up on the screen, or we have a discussion about the different templates that are there. And when I'm recording videos right now for my students, there are times that I'll refer back to the template for my students so they can see kind of what the motions and the process that students have gone through in terms of getting these sentences written down. So how does the template work? Andy's going to advance to the next slide. And What I would do is I would give them a sentence, a mentor sentence. This is a mentor sentence, comes from an 8th grade text out of Behind Rebel Lines by Seymour Wright. And so what they would do is I would give them the sentence in their Google Doc. They know this is a formal space. And so for instance, this one, they would be looking at adjectives or adverbs. You could do both. So if we were looking at the adjectives and adverbs in the sentence, I would then tell them, okay, here is your mentor sentence. Now I want you to tell me, what does this sentence look like with the adjectives and the adverbs? What does this sentence look like in the other spaces? So what would this look like in a Snapchat space? What would this sentence look like in a texting space or an email or a Facebook or a Twitter? So so they would work on this, and I usually have them work on it together. We would do one together as a class, do the guided practice, and then they would go and do one with a partner. And so when they get it all filled out is what the next slide will look like. And this is an example from a summer session that I did with some individuals. But you can see that how it looks in a Snapchat setting. You can see what it looks like in more of a text setting. And then the group that was working on the email, you can see that they were pretty robust in terms of being kind of smart alecks about it in our attempts to make substantive revisions to the sample sentence from Behind Rebel Lines. We have encountered some challenges and opportunities as a team. Typically middle school students don't write like that, but it is a formal piece of writing. And then you can see all the hashtags and things that are being used in Twitter. And then also the hashtags and how it looks in a Facebook setting too. So this was potentially what it would look like as a finished product. And again, it's getting them to use those skills in terms of what it would look like in the worlds that they write in, those spaces that they write in. And you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So as they get done with this template, it's where do we go next? Okay, so yeah, that's great. We've done the grammar skill. We've done some writing with it. I'm respecting their writing spaces. Now what do we do? This next part of my presentation is dealing with something that Dr. Troy Hicks worked with my students a little bit on. And this comes from Argument in the Real World, some things out of his book that he co-authored with Kristen Holly Turner. And what we had students do is we had them look at some sides of an argument in terms of what's going on with some COVID stuff. And so my advice is, once we get past that template part and they're doing a little bit of writing that template, is to move into some more formal writing where they're going to now be more assessed, because with the grammar template, it's more of a formative assessment. With this, it's more, with a formal piece of writing, it's going to be summative. Now I'm looking for skills. Are they using adjectives? Are they using adverbs? Are they using argument writing correctly? And so Dr. Hicks broke this down a little bit, and Troy had broken this down a little bit for my students, and just some smaller pieces of writing, and was easier to assess on my part. And so what we had them do is piggyback off of what we were doing in my classroom already before we left for COVID, and that was reading some sources. And so they were reading some things on cell phones. And in this case, we had them read on COVID. And so we had them read 2 different sources. And this was a really great resource that Troy gave us, my students, which is called All Sides. Troy, do you want to mention something real quick about All Sides before I move forward?
Sure. All Sides is an organization that, as the name implies, pulls together media from all different sides. You have things from the center as well as the political left and right, and even further out on the political left and right. Their media rankings to gauge whether things are more to the right or to the left are crowdsourced, and they make their ratings and systems pretty explicit. And they have all make all that content, then you can link back out to the original source and see it in context. They've also started adding elements where they'll say, like, this is like a news item, this is an analysis piece, this is an opinion piece. So it creates a really nice resource for students to get a quick kind of top level headline glimpse of the images and words that are associated with different issues. They have a balanced dictionary where you can go in and search for terms and then link to additional articles and see how the different sides position the different issues in different ways. We could do a whole webinar on all sides, but that's the 30-second overview.
Thank you, Troy. Appreciate
Yeah.
that. I knew he could do it better justice than what I could, because my spiel would have been like, it looks at both sides of the argument, so, or looks at both sides of politics. But so one of the first things that Troy had my students do, was he had them write a 3 to 5 sentences about what they're thinking right now in terms of how to reopen the country based on the articles that they read, and then. From there, what my students did is they looked at some headlines, they looked at pictures of the 2 different articles, and they did some responses. And then from there, and Andy, if you could advance to the next slide, sir, what we had them do, or what Trey had them do, is look at some word clouds. And this is a really great resource to be able to use in terms of creating some word clouds to see the kind of vocabulary that's used in each one of the articles, and the students can focus on that. And so what Troy did is he helped out the students, and he just plopped the word clouds down for the students. And then we had them respond in terms of what are they thinking about with these word clouds, and what are some things that they see and they notice. What does this make you think about? And I apologize for the small text here on the slide, but I wanted to fit this in. And then as the students were walking through this process, and you can go to the next slide, Andy. As they were going through this process, they get down through these different activities. Now it's looking at, especially with argument writing, we're looking at considering evidence and then starting to inform their own arguments. And so there was a table that was set up for them to do their responses in within this particular topic. And then from there was some sentence starters that students could start writing a more formal in terms of argument. So basically the idea behind the lesson was to continue to scaffold and do these smaller pieces of writing with the students after learning a skill that they had learned in terms of grammar, and then they can apply it to more of that formal piece of writing. And so to kind of let you know what things look like in terms of a formal piece of writing, for me, they would submit it on a Google document, obviously, and then if there's specific skills we've been going over grammatically for the last few weeks, I would have them use the highlight feature in in Google Docs. And so I would have them highlight like 4 adjectives, or highlight 3 adverbs, or 5 linking verbs, so I can see that they're using that skill correctly. So there's more of a summative assessment there. So you can see the build up that goes on in terms of going from grammar flip to the grammar template to more of a formal piece of writing. So that was the steps that I wanted to show you. And to be quite honest with you, in terms of any kind of writing, I feel like with remote teaching right now is almost that KISS method. Keep it simple, silly. Don't make it too difficult for yourself, and make it smaller pieces so that it's easier for you to grade, and easier to give feedback on for the students. And then also they don't feel so overwhelmed because you're not sitting right there beside them. So, and the next slide, Mr. Shinneborn, I believe, is going to him. And so he's up. And if you have any questions for me in terms of at the end, I will be more than willing to answer those questions. And yeah, Andy's got to have time to present his stuff.
Oh, that's all right. Actually, because ours are quite different, it might be a good time while people are thinking about Jeremy's presentation right now. Maybe we'll take 2 minutes, 3 minutes. If you could maybe put a question in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask Jeremy a question, I think that would be great.
Yep. Or if you feel more comfortable using the YoTeach app and you want to familiarize yourself more with that, you can do that too. So, thank you, Andy.
You're welcome. Okay, because I'm sharing my screen, I don't see any questions coming up. Jeremy, do you see any questions?
No, the only thing I was going to say is if you did want more of a thorough kind of walkthrough of the grammar template, on my website, jeremyheiler40.com, there are some webinars that I have done in the past. I did one in April for AMLE that does walk through that a little bit more entirely. So you can check out that webinar. It's free. You can just go and access it, and then it'll walk that through a little bit more.
Great.
I would just add really quickly, there are some templates. I'm just going to put one in here of an Instagram Google Slides template. There's one, if you search for Instagram, Google Slides template, Snapchat, Google Slides template, Facebook, Google Slides template, you'll find a lot of other ones. So even if that whole grammar template is a little overwhelming and maybe too much, and you just want to focus kids on one specific one, there are many others that are out there. And yeah, Fred, if you let us know exactly what links you need, we can be sure to get them in the chat and we'll follow up. Oh,
I
look
think
at
he
that.
was referring
Jeremy's
to.
already on it.
Yep,
All
I
right.
think that. So I'm going to get those in there for him.
Awesome, great. Thank you so much. So I stopped showing my screen for just a moment. I'll go back to sharing here. I think, even having that bit of a pause for us to have some questions, maybe for Jeremy, is useful for us, because even if, when we're in a regular classroom situation and setting, that teacher wait time is a hard thing to do. It can seem, even for me, it's even more challenging when you're in a virtual setting, because for whatever reason, it seems like the time goes by even slower. I don't know exactly why it is, but I'm used to the wait time in the classroom. I'm not so used to the wait time here when we come together in a virtual setting. Before we get started, Jeremy had you do a little bit of writing, and we're going to do a little bit of writing as well. I don't know if you have heard of hashtag poetry before. Maybe you've heard of hashtag poetry. Maybe you haven't heard of hashtag poetry. A hashtag is something that we see pretty ubiquitously on Twitter and on Facebook. It's essentially a pound sign with usually a word or a phrase or something that comes after that. And in the chat room, I'm going to invite those who feel comfortable doing this to write a 5 hashtag poem that talks about something that lights a fire under you, something that's a fire within you. I'd like you to write a hashtag poem, 5 hashtags, about something that is either lights a fire within you or burns within you. So we're going to take just a couple minutes to do that. I will do this also in the chat room before we get moving forward with that. So if you feel like you kind of know what you're doing, great. If you want to put it in the chat, that's great too. If you don't want to do that in the chat either, that's okay. These hashtag poems won't take too long to do. But let's just take just 2 minutes, please, to see what is a fire that might be lit within you. Take about another minute. I'm seeing some beautiful words coming up across the chat room for those who are willing to share. You can see there's no right or wrong way to do this. The wonderful thing about poetry is poetry can have rules, but it doesn't have to have rules at all. All right, maybe 15 more seconds or so. And I'm going to ask too, if someone would mind sharing what they've written. I can share what I've written, and Andrea might be willing to share, and Dewar might be willing to share, and Angela perhaps, and perhaps Dr. Murchie. We'll see if we can get 3 people out there, and I'll be one of those 3, so you have to try your mic experiences here. Is there someone who's willing to start first? I'm always willing to start first, but I ask my students too if they would like to go first too, because I don't always want to be the lead voice in my classroom or in this digital space. Is someone willing to go ahead?
Sure. This is Angela.
Thank you.
Hashtag ready to go, hashtag high school, hashtag onward, hashtag moving on up, hashtag freshman.
Thank you, thank you. Now, if you could do me this favor, let's celebrate her, please, by snapping your fingers. All you have to do is clap. You're welcome. Or you can clap, or even like this too. This is kind of the ASL sign for celebration, which is helpful too for our students who may be hearing impaired. So we can celebrate this way as well. Thank you. Somebody else willing to share? I'll share mine then. See if I can find it here. I wrote, hashtag ready to learn, hashtag sharing our stories, hashtag noticing the world around me, hashtag noticing the world within, hashtag sharing stories. You can give me snaps too, or you can do whatever kind of celebration you like, you want to do. And I try to tell students too, it's not about getting, applause for myself or for anybody else. It's about taking the time to recognize the beautiful words and recognize the risk that it takes to kind of not only put your words out here into a chat, but also lift your words from the chat out into the ether so that we can hear them a little bit more. And I share that with you because...
Andy, just let you know, Lori has hand raised too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You got one more. Yep, no problem.
Please, go right ahead. I didn't see that. Lori, please share.
I have grading never ends, feedback versus grading, insomnia pandemic, all this time feels like not enough, and masks are not fun.
Very nice. Thank you so much. And you can cheer those words any way that you choose. Thank you, Lori, and I'm sorry to miss you there. Sometimes with so many people, it's hard for me to see. So I'm going to go back to my screen here. There we are. And so this is kind of what we're doing. I think it's important for us to do this, especially for writing, is to create these spaces for poetry in the virtual classroom as well. Because even though we're not in the same room together, we can be brought together through the words that we have and the words that we heard and the words that we can share together with each other. It can feel a lot easier, maybe kind of weird to do snaps and things at home, but it feels nice to be able to do that. And it kind of pulls you in together as part of that community. We know that giving space for independent reading is important in the classroom, and I'm a strong proponent of that. I think we need to have, whether you call it SSR or independent reading or drop everything and read, but I also think, and a few years ago I started shifting how I can bring independent writing into the classroom too. Instead of being told what to write all the time, what can we do to bring in new types of writing into the classroom? And creating this space for poetry has been one of the things that have helped me do that. And this is a poem that I always read to my students. And I think creating that space is important, and that fire that you have written about kind of comes up within these words too. And let's think just a little bit about those spaces that we give our students, or perhaps in a virtual world, we don't really feel like we can give them as much space, maybe. So bear with me, please, as I recite Judy Soren Brown's Fire. What makes the fire burn is space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in too tight can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between, as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is fuel and the absence of fuel together that make fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. We always give snaps, so I'm going to have to give snaps for that. Beautiful. I think that helps me keep cognizant of what we're doing in our classrooms, virtually or not virtually, and what kind of spaces are we creating so we can let our students breathe and think about the work they're doing in writing. And Amy Ludwig van der Water, in her wonderful book, Poems for Teachers, which is actually considered to be a K-8 textbook, but I use it with my AP level students. She tells us from poetry we can learn a whole lot of things. We can find ideas and self-inspire. We can know how to structure texts. We can use language in pleasing and surprising ways. We can learn how to craft beginnings and endings. We can also learn how to kind of choose titles for the pieces that we have. And in my classroom, and I alluded to this already a little bit, but I try to set it up where I have regular habits and routines for writing. You can see that on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I have silent reading or independent reading or SSR. You can see every single day we start with a poem. On Mondays, we start with spoken word to bring in other authors outside of our spaces into our spaces. We have a poem of the day. Right now, I'm reading from Mary Oliver's Devotions, which is a collection of her anthology, just beautiful words. And on Friday, we usually have what's called a featured poet, or what I call Featured Poet Friday. I'll talk more about that here in just a little bit. But we also honor the words that come within our classrooms. Students work, and a lot of students choose poems because they can be small and they don't have to have rules. And some of those poems are just absolutely beautiful. And I'll encourage students and invite them to share those words with us on Fridays, which actually makes it a nice way to come to a close. So we start with a professional spoken word poet. We listen to a bunch of poems throughout the week, and then we finish with a person in the classroom, which is nice. And we don't do anything with these. We just listen to the words. We just give snaps. We just give claps. We just give the ASL sign for applause. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we spend time specifically with some creative writing. And even in the spaces that I'm working virtually right now, I do that as well. Today is Tuesday, so we happen to be working with my juniors on a quarantine journal. So I've given them a different prompt, and they're talking about quarantine. Today was board games, like B-O-R-E-D, like you're bored, versus board games like Monopoly? And what kind of games are you playing right now while you're in your quarantine? And just gives us a sense of connection with each other. And we just shared those simply. Oops. There we go. And then I like to have this reflective writing routine as we kind of work through. I teach in trimesters, which is 12 weeks. If you teach in semesters, you can make this fit for how you want to do it. But we think reflectively about our processes and through our blog posts. And we think about where we are as readers and writers. In our second blog post, every 6 weeks, we have a piece of creative writing that students submit. It's a choice piece they submit. That's where we get our featured poets from most of the time. We analyze our reading. We talk about the growth territories that we've been exploring within the units we're in. And we build this all up towards a final exam in which they can use all 7 posts before and really pause and think reflectively about how they are growing as readers and as writers by doing what we know writers need to be doing. And that's putting your butt in the seat and putting your hands on the keyboard or putting that pen in your hand and writing. Writing can seem magical, but it's really all, for me, it's about the work. And I know when I'm in routine, the words begin to come easier. And when I fall out of routine, I know the words become a lot more difficult. And that's the same, I find that same experience in virtual spaces as I do in traditional classroom spaces as well. This is an example of a student of mine during Featured Poet Friday. Some of these are so stunning that I don't want to have them be left in a virtual space. I don't want their words to get stuck in a Google document that's going to be erased when they graduate. I don't want it to be just left inside the cinder block school classroom that they might be in, or in our virtual spaces at home. So to do that, when students have some spectacular pieces of work, I invite them and ask them if we could share that work out loud, not just for featured poets, but also share it on Twitter and on Facebook with their permission and also with their parents' permission. Not looking for any praise or really anything, but just taking that next step so that they can call themselves a writer by putting their work out into a place that's not graded and people can freely comment on it. When I place these things, I try to be sure to place them in places where I know that I have teacher writers, where I know that I have poets and I have authors who know how to respond to student work in a way that's going to be uplifting. I'm also choosing poems specifically that are just wonderful anyway, so it's difficult to have people speak negatively about these things, and that actually has not happened yet. But when a kid gets a like or a thumbs up, or they get comments from a reader, from someone who's not a teacher, not from someone who they don't know, that is real authentic kind of feedback that you just can't really buy too well, because someone who doesn't know you is telling you wonderful things about your words, and that can be uplifting and begin to help you identify as a writer too. I try to share these places in a Live Right EduBlog space that I've created. So I'm just going to share this with you really quickly. These are all student works, but I have some of my works in there as well. I'm just looking at my time here. I think I'm doing okay. So on here, these are all, I have student permission to have these on here. I also do my own work on here too. So I'm just going to show you something that I wrote, not to brag about what I'm writing, but I want to show you that I'm doing what I'm expecting my students to do. So essentially, I have a title, I have a high definition image that we can get from Pexels, Pixabay, or Unsplash. I have a published looking piece. I also have, and these are the 2 most important parts, I think, the words from the author, what's the inspiration for the piece, and then what's the significant revision decision that was made in that particular piece. That structure and format came from, the words from the author format came from Amy Ludwig Vanderwater's Poems Are Teachers, and revision decision came from Jeff Anderson, and I think it's Deborah Dean's revision decision book, actually. So I kind of combined a bunch of things for that. And we have students who are able to write just some beautiful kinds of things. This is from a student named Malachi, and we won't be able to read through it, but you can see he's done some of the same type of stuff. And we're able to get some replies on those as well, which is just wonderful. Well, let's see here. There we go. Sometimes when I'm sharing my screen, it doesn't go right back to where I want to. So Live Right for me is a good place to share some student work and to get it out there. Other places, especially if you are teaching in elementary school, I think Amy Ludwig van der Water's The Poem Farm is a wonderful place to go. She even titles it Growing Poets One Child at a Time. So she kind of moves her writing towards K-8 writers. So you find lots of information on there, and I would follow Amy also on Twitter if you haven't done that. I think if you're in high school, Brett Vogelsinger's Go Poems are really wonderful too. He does this every 30 days during National Poetry Month, but you can contribute to that. And he invites teachers sometimes too to contribute posts there. I've been able to contribute a post to there as well, which is pretty nice because then when I get to show kids, we're not just doing other things, but we're contributing in other ways as teachers and as writers too. And we can welcome kids and invite students into doing that. I like Rattle. I don't know if you've heard of Rattle before, but they have a monthly ekphrastic poem where you can win real money, which is kind of cool. I'm not going to try to click on that right now, but an ekphrastic poem is just an image or a picture, and you write as though that is your prompt. And it doesn't ask for any kind of structure in the writing. You just write in response to a picture. And Rattle, I encourage students to submit to that, and you can win, I think it's $50 a month through Rattle, which is kind of nice. And for us, I think a really good place to go is Sarah Donovan's Verse Love or Sarah Donovan's 5-Day Challenge. These are authentic writing instructions that are not just for students, like these two places are with the Go Poems and the Poem Farm, but it's also a good spot for us as teacher writers because Sarah spends time working specifically with teacher writers and tries to help them think about their writing in ways and places and spaces using poetry and lots of other things and coming together into this community that she's built called Verse Love. In this case, there was a guest host. It was Padma Venkantraman. She's the author of Time to Dance, The Bridge Home, and Island's End. So you get to write with real authors, which is actually kind of cool. The process is always the same. We talk about the inspiration for the piece. The host talks about the process and how you go through the writing of that piece. The host also always shares the poem that they have, and then we're asked to write about that. And what I like about this specifically is we're also taught about comments as a genre and how to comment on poems in a certain way. So we can get beyond saying something is great or that's lovely and good job, but we can also actually talk about the words themselves and lift those words up and help writers see themselves as writers a little bit more. What's nice about this too is I was lucky enough, I was wondering what I could do with my students on my writing days, and Dr. Donovan allowed my students kind of incognito to write to these prompts and to share these prompts. So I'm looking for a student's work right now. So here's an example of Swaney, who's a student of mine now. Dr. Donovan knew that she was a student, but no one else did. And so she shared her poem. I'm not going to click on the link. But what I like about this is Swaney gets to see that she is getting feedback from real people all around the nation, in some ways around the world, and she gets not only validation, authentic feedback, and she gets to hear smart interactions about the words that she is willing to share. I do these as well, and there is nothing quite like the feeling of hearing back from other people. And not only do we just get to hear back from people, but also part of what Dr. Donovan has put together is if you are going to post, she asks that you comment on at least 3 other people's poems as well, which is really quite a lovely way to be part of a community. So although it's not really for students, Dr. Donovan was kind enough to let me in and my students in during the pandemic. This is a good place for teachers to go to. So we have the Poem Farm for young writers, Go Poems for high school writers. You can get paid for writing your poetry, and you can also work on some things for yourself as a teacher writer as well. So I think to kind of round us up here, I think, yeah, we're doing okay on time. Jeremy, if you want to walk through some of the final thoughts that you have here, then I'll share some of my final thoughts, and then I think we'll have time to open up for some questions and answers, if that sounds okay to the both of you.
Yeah, you know, kind of what I was reiterating earlier, just making sure we keep it simple for students and not too difficult. I think even with some of the stuff that Andy's doing above the hashtag poem, I think, that's very simple for students to do, but yet they're writing, and that's what we want them to be able to do. I'm all about respecting student writing spaces. Andy talked about giving them spaces in terms of where, even when we're online, we can give them those spaces. But even if we're not like teaching synchronously, I'm not gonna be able to say it. Asynchronously, yeah, I'm saying it wrong. Anyways, I'm not even gonna try anymore. But whether or not we're doing it with our students or we're just shipping out a video, making sure that we are respecting those writing spaces for our students, because they are engaged in those spaces every single day, whether we want to believe it or not. And address relevant issues with them. What's going on. I have found since the beginning of this that students, yes, it's a topic that is kind of, repeating itself over and over, but students do want to talk about COVID and they want to talk about how it's impacting them. Many of my students' parents have lost jobs or their parents are working at home. So it's affected them in many different ways. And so it's good to give them that space to definitely talk about and to write about as well. Smaller writing pieces so that we're not overwhelming them, easier to assess for you as well. So those are just some of the final thoughts that I wanted to leave you with today, in terms of thinking about the different spaces that students write in and thinking about how we can actually get students to understand grammar a little bit more, especially in an online spaces, and especially when they're writing in those spaces that they have even more, besides just remote teaching. So hopefully those final thoughts can resonate with you. And if you have any questions after Andy's done, I'm sure we'll have time for those.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that we haven't really talked about yet today, which is kind of nice, and it's easier when we're using kind of remote learning like this, but we haven't done worksheets, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
We've done real, authentic kind of ways to think about fiction and nonfiction and being generative and creative in the writing that we have, and also thinking critically about all sides of an issue to bring together arguments for yourself and the different types of tools that we can use along the way too. So even though we look at the poems that I may have and the creative writing that I bring to my classroom, I'm only spending about 30 minutes a week doing that. And so I've even pulled back on that more during this time that we're in. We take about 10 minutes, so 20 minutes per week. But invite that time for creative writing, because so many times, and I'm guilty of this too, our students are told what to write that they never get a chance to write for themselves. And just like when you get the chance to read for yourself, it makes you a better reader, it makes you want to read. When you have that chance to write just for yourself, and I use the idea of creative writing pretty loosely. So I'll have students will say, well, I've been wanting to think about this. I'm kind of a history person. Can I do that? And I said, sure, as long as it's something that you want to do and it's not just, doing homework for another class, then I'm happy with that. I think also, not only for us as teacher writers, but also for our students, try to schedule regular habits and routines for low stakes writing. Now, there's so many high stakes, high pressure writing things out there that low stakes writing kind of gets forgotten about. I think we should encourage by example. We write, we share, we celebrate writing. And as awkward as it feels in class, I celebrate writing too. I have a book birthday coming up on June 2nd, and all along the way, I would tell kids, hey, guess what? This is kind of coming up. Let me show you my stupid little video I put on Facebook of me unboxing the books that I got, and I always feel weird because I don't know how kids take that, but I do that because I want them to be comfortable enough to celebrate the writing that they do as well, or the things that they do. And I think there's a difference between the bragging about it and just saying, hey, these are some pretty special things that we can do from time to time, and to lift those things up are nice. To be able to celebrate beautiful words, brave writing, personal accomplishments. And I think, I know as a writer, the two greatest gifts that I need are space and time. You give me some space, you let me go where I need to go, and you give me time, even if it's just 10 minutes or the 2 minutes like we've given. That is useful to help think about writing both in virtual spaces and also in traditional spaces as well. So I think here I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment. And I haven't seen the chat because I've been sharing my screen, so I don't know if there's any questions or comments that are coming up, but I know Jeremy and I and Troy would love to hear any questions that you may have for any one of us, and we're happy to answer those either in a chat or if you're brave enough to go with the audio, to do that too.
I have a question about blogging.
Yeah.
So how how did you get students up and running in the beginning of the year? And is it at this point probably too late to try to do that? I teach 7th graders, and so I wonder about how I could begin to possibly get them to try to just learn how to blog and
Sure.
then post.
Well, I've done blogging in lots of different ways, and most recently what I like, and I think just to answer that question, I think it's probably, I don't want to say it's too late. I mean, I've only got about 4 weeks maybe or so left. We're out June 5th, so it depends on where you're at. But I also like to take advantage of what's called the fresh start effect, where you can kind of get kids when they're ready to kind of interact with things right away, especially if it's something new. What I do is I sort of trick them into it. I have them on first day. We don't do the get to know you kind of games that I used to do. What we do is we take our notebooks or something to write on, and we go write our literacy journeys, kind of the story of how we came to read and how we came to write. I do this with my juniors and seniors and 10th graders and 9th graders and whomever I've had. We take that piece of writing once it's done and once it's polished up, and I use that as their first blog post. We use EduBlogs in my class because it's pretty easy to use. Then I have them share links with me, and I have a website where I put all their links down there so we can see things. We can see things together, and we can comment on each other's work that way too. So, and then we have periodically those different reflection pieces, and I use blogging for reflection versus anything else that I've done, which has been like book reviews and things like that. But I like to start with the literacy journey. Did I answer that okay for you, Amy?
Yeah, I think especially when you said EduBlogs was pretty easy. I'm just wondering how intuitive it is to post a piece of writing.
I think it's pretty fluid and flexible. I mean, it's run by it's a offshoot of WordPress.
WordPress.
Yeah, so that's another reason why I chose it, because if they choose to do something later with WordPress, it won't have so much of a learning curve. But I find it pretty easy. Sometimes working with technology, you always have digital hangups every once in a while, but I try to give space in that first week. My main goal by the end of that first week is we have one thing published, just one post. That's my goal. So we have lots of space within that week to take care of any technical difficulties, which also helps kids too, because then they can learn from each other. I can learn from them, and they can be good to go for the rest of, in my case, the trimester.
Amy, I used to teach middle school, 7th and 8th grade, and I also did blogging through EduBlogs with my students. And one option you might consider is have a class blog in which they're all authors. So then you're not I mean, it does, just for the time frame, it would lose that they'd lose the personalization of each of their own sites. But if they're familiar, then maybe you could build from that, going forward. And I found doing I called it blogging boot camp, where they just learn sort of the process of it on a daily basis, getting into the routine. And then after that, it was kind of a weekly thing. But yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and I would also, Amy, I would encourage you to, because I teach 6th grade. I would encourage you to, if we ever get back into the classroom, to do something, I always call it paper blogs, where the students will do a blog on paper and then they post it around the room so it's public, and then give them sticky notes and they can go around and make comments on their blog around the room. So that can kind of be a good introductory activity to blogging. I've done that before in my creative writing class, and it works out really well.
Great. Well, I am going to have us pause for just a moment to say a few words about what we're hoping to do this summer, and that is this Remote Literacy Learning Promising Practices for Online Classrooms Institute. We've put the flyer in the chat, as well as a link to more information. If you'd like to hang out for a few minutes after we're done recording, we can talk about that and tell you a little bit more about what it's going to be about. And we'll certainly be mentioning it in the next few weeks in our webinars. But if you've enjoyed anything about what you've experienced today or in our previous sessions, and you want to go deeper with your own professional learning, the Chippewa River Writing Project is going to be hosting that Open Institute later this summer. So with that, any final thoughts from the group any questions for Andy or Jeremy that they could answer in just a moment or two, or point you to one more resource?
I just want to say, I think Jeremy would agree with this too. You know, there's not any one right way to do something. So hearing all these different blogging platforms, I think you find out what's going to work well for you. And when you feel kind of comfortable with that, then it's easier to kind of move it forward to your students. Also learn from your students too. I'm sure you all do that anyway, but just be flexible with what you're doing. I don't think neither one of us would kind of champion one right way to do things, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So like I said at the beginning, if you have the answer to how we do this thing online, then please let me know, because we're all learning from each other. So absolutely.
All right. Well, we're so glad to learn from you today. So with that, we'll bring the formal part of the webinar to a close. And certainly if anyone wants to stick around for a few minutes and ask some more questions or have a little bit more conversation, we'll be here. I will follow up with emails and additional links for weeks ahead. We thank everybody for taking some time on their Tuesday afternoon, and especially Andy and Jeremy for sharing your expertise. So thanks so much for joining us this week.
Thank you.